He thought he understood power. He thought a badge meant control. But one decision in the dark would break that illusion forever. Because in Riverhaven, on a night when the streets were quiet and the air was calm, Officer Mark Davis would cross a line he could never uncross. He would lay his hands on a man he believed had no voice, no influence, no protection. And within minutes, Mark would discover that the man he struck was the one person he should have feared most. The real story begins long before the slap, but the slap is what changed everything. Stay with this story. Every few minutes, another truth unfolds, and every truth cuts deeper than the last. The quiet start before everything went wrong. Riverhaven was slow that night. The kind of slow that makes officers relax a little. Not careless, just calm. Officer Mark Davis liked nights like this. No bar fights. No reckless kids. No emergencies. Just peace. The time was 10:17 p.m. The sky carried a faint orange glow from the city lights. Most neighborhoods were quiet, the houses tucked behind trimmed hedges and dim porches. Mark sat inside his patrol car near an old grocery store that had been closed for years. He sipped lukewarm coffee and watched the empty parking lot. Then a car caught his eye. A silver luxury sedan drifted through the intersection ahead. Smooth, quiet, confident. It was the kind of car someone important might drive. Or someone wealthy. Or someone trying to look wealthy. Nothing about it looked suspicious. Nothing except one thing. The car turned left. No signal. Not even a blink. A tiny offense. Barely worth a shrug. But Mark felt something itch in the back of his mind. A rule was a rule. And when nights were slow, enforcing the small rules felt like a way to show he was doing something. Maybe that was why he pulled out from the lot. Maybe he wanted to remind the driver that attention mattered. Or maybe, deep down, Mark liked the feeling of being in control. Whatever the reason, he flipped on his lights. The sedan slowed gently, as if expecting the stop. Then it rolled to the curb with perfect ease. Mark stepped out of his car. He took his time, adjusted his belt, straightened his uniform, pretended he was doing everything by the book. But something in him was already shifting, a quiet tension he refused to acknowledge. When he reached the driver's side, the window rolled down. Slow and steady. Measured. Inside sat a man around 45. Dark skin. Short hair. Calm eyes. A dark gray suit that looked tailored. A watch that did not belong to someone ordinary. His hands rested carefully on the steering wheel. Not shaking. Not nervous. Just still. And the way he looked at Mark made something tighten in Mark's chest. Not fear. Not disrespect. Just calm waiting. Mark hated it. He did not know why. He only knew he felt the need to reassert something. Anything. License and registration, Mark said, sharper than he intended. The man nodded slowly. He opened the glove compartment with careful movements. Not rushed. Not defensive. Just controlled. "May I know why I'm being stopped?" he asked, his voice steady and low. Mark crossed his arms. "No signal during your turn." A short silence followed. Not disrespectful. Just a pause. A pause that felt like the man was thinking, judging, measuring him. Mark hated that even more. "License and registration," he repeated. The man handed them to him without a word. Mark glanced at the ID without reading the name. He barely took in anything, because something else bothered him more. The man's calmness, the way he held himself, the steady breathing, the unshaken posture. Mark felt small under that quiet. He did not understand why, so he pushed back with authority. "You live around here?" he asked. The man let out a slow breath. "Does that matter?" The answer was soft, not rude, not sarcastic, just honest. But to Mark, it felt like a challenge. He felt his grip on the ID tighten. "Step out of the car." The man's expression shifted just a little. His jaw moved. His eyes narrowed the smallest amount. But he said nothing. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door. He stepped out. And standing beside his car, he looked even taller, broader, more grounded. Mark felt his pulse speed up. He gestured to the back of the car. "Hands on the trunk." The man hesitated only for a breath. Then he placed his palms flat against the metal. Mark moved behind him. He could feel the power shifting in the air. It was subtle, hard to explain, but it made him uneasy. He placed his hand on the man's back to guide him down. The man stiffened slightly, not resisting, just reacting. And that was when something inside Mark snapped. He did not think. He did not reason. He did not control himself. His hand flew forward. A sharp smack exploded through the empty street. The sound was quick and brutal. The man's head jerked to the side. His body froze. The air around them felt dead, heavy, still. Mark's heart stumbled. His breath caught. He had crossed a line. Before he could speak, before he could think, the man turned his head back toward him. "Come." Unblinking, controlled, terrifying in the quiet. Then the man reached into his jacket. Mark's stomach twisted. Out came an ID. He held it up. The name read, Eric Miles. Under it, Chief of Police. Mark's superior. His commanding officer. The highest authority in the entire River Haven Police Department. Mark felt the world drop out from under him. He had struck the one man he could never afford to touch. And Eric Miles simply stared at him. Calm, cold, in total control. And this was only the beginning. Mark could not speak. His throat felt tight, and his vision pulsed at the edges. He was staring at the ID, but it felt like the words were carved into his skin instead of the card. Chief of Police. He had slapped the Chief of Police. Eric Miles lowered the ID with the same unshaken calm he had shown from the moment the window rolled down. That calm made everything worse. A shout would have been easier. Anger would have made sense. Anything would have felt better than this quiet control. Before Mark could pull in a breath, a voice drifted from behind him. "Everything all right here, Davis?" Mark turned too fast. Another patrol car had pulled up. Officer Ben Ortiz, his usual partner, was stepping out with a confused look. Ben glanced between Mark and Eric, reading the tension instantly. His eyebrows lowered. His hand hovered near his belt. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but Eric answered first. "Everything is fine," he said, smoothing his voice like nothing had happened. "Your officer was conducting a stop." Ben looked doubtful. His eyes moved to Mark, searching for an explanation. Eric did not acknowledge him. His attention stayed locked on Mark. Clipped, cold, sharp as a blade. "Am I free to go, Officer Davis?" Mark felt his chest tighten. His fingers twitched. He wanted to say no. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to rewind the last 10 minutes and do everything differently. But Eric's question sat in the air like a threat. This was the moment. The moment Mark could ruin his life or pretend this never happened and pray. "No, sir," Mark whispered, then stopped himself, panic sliding hot down his spine. "No, I mean, yes." "Yes, sir. You are free to go." Eric let out a slow breath through his nose. Not relief. Not annoyance. Just something cold. A reminder of power. He turned slightly. Good to see at least some professionalism in this department, he said to Ben. Ben looked stunned. Eric stepped back toward his car, opened the door, sat down, closed it quietly. The sedan pulled away, slipping into the night like it had never been there at all. But it had. And it had taken something with it. The moment the car vanished from sight, Ben turned to Mark. "What happened?" he demanded. His voice was low, urgent. "Mark, what did you do?" Mark felt his jaw clench. His body felt stiff. He tried to breathe, but the air felt wrong. "It was just a stop," he muttered. Ben stared at him. "Man, you look like you saw a ghost." Mark looked away. The beat of the streetlights, the distant hum of cars. Everything felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. He shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Forget it." Ben did not believe him, but he did not push. "I'll file the stop," Ben said. "You all right to drive?" Mark lied. "Yeah." Ben nodded slowly and walked back to his cruiser. Mark watched him go, feeling like the ground under him was loose. He reached for his own car door, but his hand froze halfway. His chest tightened. Eric Miles had let him walk away. No threats, no punishment, no scene, which meant something worse. Eric was waiting, planning, choosing the moment. The fear settled deep, heavy, sharp. Mark barely slept that night. His mind replayed every second of the stop. The calm eyes, the ID, the silence, the slap. 1,000 thoughts collided, but none made sense. What would Eric do? Would he file a report? Would Internal Affairs drag Mark into an interrogation? Would he be fired? Arrested? Disgraced? Every answer made his stomach twist. He stared at the ceiling for hours, trapped in everything he could not undo. By morning, he could barely stand without feeling sick. He dressed in silence. His hands shook as he buttoned his uniform. He kept telling himself that maybe Eric had decided to overlook it. Maybe it would fade out quietly. Maybe he had imagined the danger. Maybe. His phone buzzed. He grabbed it quickly. A message from Internal Affairs. Report to the chief's office immediately. His breath stopped. It was happening. He drove to the station with numb hands gripping the wheel. Every turn felt heavy. Every red light felt too long. Every passing officer felt like a witness. When he stepped inside the precinct, the atmosphere changed. He felt eyes follow him. Quiet whispers. Small hesitations. A glance. A nod. A shift. They did not know the details, but they knew something had happened. Rumors always moved faster than truth inside a department. Mark kept his head down. He tried not to look anyone in the eye. The elevator ride felt slow. Painfully slow. Each floor number blinked at a crawling pace. When he reached the top floor, the hall felt too long. Too bright. Too empty. He forced himself to breathe and walked toward Eric Miles's office. He pushed the door open. Eric was at his desk, flipping through a file without looking up. Another man stood off to the side. A tall, broad man with gray hair and a stiff expression. Captain Ross. 27 years in the department. Known for being unmovable. Unforgiving. The air in the room was heavy. Eric finally looked up. "Officer Davis," he said. "Sit." Mark's legs felt wooden as he lowered himself into the chair. He tried to steady his breath. He failed. Eric leaned back, folding his hands. His face was unreadable. Measured. Controlled. "Tell me," he said after a quiet moment, "how would you report last night's stop?" Mark swallowed hard. His throat burned. His mind scrambled for words. For excuses. For anything that made sense. "Routine stop," he said, voice thin. Failure to signal. Eric nodded slowly. And after that? Mark's pulse thudded in his ears. I asked for his ID. The driver was uncooperative. Eric's brow lifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to show the first crack of something underneath. Uncooperative, he repeated. Captain Ross shifted slightly, watching Mark with sharp focus. Mark felt trapped. He questioned why he was being stopped, Mark said. His voice was cracking, even if he tried to hide it. Eric turned to Ross. Would you consider that uncooperative, Captain? Ross shook his head once. Not unless he refused to comply. Eric's eyes returned to Mark. Did I refuse to comply? Mark's stomach twisted painfully. No, sir. Did I resist? No, sir. Did I insult you? Mark stared at the floor. No, sir. Eric leaned forward. His eyes locked on Mark. Then why, he asked, his voice cold and calm, did you hit me? The question sliced him open. Mark could not speak. Words clung to his throat and refused to move. Eric watched him carefully. Not angry. Just observant. Calculating. You do not have an answer, he said quietly. Mark felt the shame burn through his chest. Eric straightened and slid a paper across the desk. Mark stared at it. A suspension notice. You are off duty until further notice, Eric said. Mark's hands trembled as he reached for it. Chief Miles, I... Dismissed. Mark stood, legs shaking under him. He barely saw Ross open the door for him. He barely felt the floor beneath his feet. But as he stepped out, Eric spoke again. We are not done. The tone made Mark flinch, because he knew it was true. Tomorrow would hurt more than today. And this was only the beginning. Mark sat in his car for almost a full minute before he realized he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his hands had gone numb. The suspension notice lay in his lap like a weight he could not lift. 60 days. No badge. No pay. No control. And worse than all of that was the silence. Eric Miles had let him go without a single raised voice. Silence from a man like that was not mercy. It was pressure. Slow and crushing. Mark drove home in a fog. He could not remember the lights. He could not remember the turns. Everything blurred into a dull haze. By the time he stepped inside his apartment, he felt hollow. He sat on the couch. He read the suspension notice 3 times. Maybe more. Each word felt sharper than the last. His chest tightened. His throat ached. This was not just punishment. It was a message. Hours passed without him noticing. He kept replaying the moment he hit Eric. The sound. The stillness after. The look in Eric's eyes. Not shock. Not anger. Not fear. Just clear. Direct. Controlled. That look followed him into the night, and it was still there in the morning. Days slid by in silence. No call from the precinct. No message from Ben. No updates from anyone. It felt like the department had swallowed him whole and erased him from sight. The quiet was worse than shouting. It left him alone with the memory of what he had done. On the 4th day, Mark's phone buzzed. He grabbed it instantly. Internal Affairs. Report in. His stomach knotted. He drove back with stiff hands gripping the wheel. This time, the glances in the precinct were sharper. Some officers pretended not to stare. Some did not bother hiding it. Mark kept his head down and walked straight into the conference room. Inside sat 3 people. Captain Ross, an investigator named Hale, and at the far end, sitting calmly with his hands folded, was Eric Miles. He did not look at Mark when he entered. Hale cleared his throat. Officer Davis, let us review the events of the stop. Mark nodded, though his throat felt dry. You pulled the driver over for failure to signal, Hale said, checking the file. Describe what followed. Mark forced his voice steady. I asked for ID. The driver questioned the reason for the stop. That is all. Mark felt heat crawl up his neck. No. I asked him to step out of the vehicle. And then, Mark tried to breathe. I placed my hand on him, and I struck him. Hale watched him with unreadable eyes. Why did you strike the driver? Mark froze. He tried to form a reason. Any reason. But nothing came. Ross crossed his arms. No answer. Mark swallowed. I lost control. Hale raised an eyebrow. Your report states the driver was uncooperative. Mark glanced at Eric. Eric did not move. I assumed he was resisting, Mark said quietly. Eric finally looked up. His eyes met Mark's. No anger. Just a direct, steady gaze. Assumed, Eric repeated. Mark's breath hitched. Hale closed the file. Officer Davis. You have 15 years of service with no prior issues. That works in your favor. However, this was unacceptable use of force. Mark felt the words hit like a blow. You will be suspended for 60 days without pay, Hale continued. You will attend mandatory training in de-escalation and bias response. Another incident like this will result in termination. Mark nodded slowly. It was not mercy, but it was not the end. He stood, ready to leave. But Eric's voice stopped him. Davis. Mark froze. Eric spoke without looking up. This is not finished. Mark left the room with a weight pressing deeper into his chest than before. He had survived the hearing. But he had not survived Eric. The weeks that followed were long and suffocating. Training felt like humiliation wrapped in discipline. Mark sat in a room with a dozen other officers, all avoiding eye contact. The instructor was a retired detective named Nina Carter. Her presence alone commanded silence. She played a video on the first day. A body cam clip. A black man pulled over for a small violation. A white officer with a sharp tone. A slow build of tension. A sudden snap. Mark watched the man in the video keep his hands visible. Controlled. Trying to survive. Nina paused the video. Then she turned and looked directly at Mark. What did the officer see when he walked up to that car? Mark stared at the floor. He knew the answer. A threat. Nina nodded slowly. And what did you see when you walked up to Chief Miles? Mark's chest tightened. He felt every eye in the room on him. A threat, he admitted. And was he a threat? No. Nina took a step closer. Then where did that idea come from? The question stung. It did not attack him loudly. It did not accuse him openly. It simply forced him to face himself. Mark could not answer. Not because he refused. Because he finally understood. He did not know. For the first time since the slap, he felt the weight shift inside him. Not away from him, but deeper. Pressing for truth. 2 months later, Mark walked back into the precinct. Everything looked the same. The same walls. The same desks. The same coffee smell drifting through the air. But he was not the same. When he set his things down, the hallway fell quiet for a moment. Every officer looked without asking. Without judging. Just watching. Then a shadow moved behind him. Eric Miles walked past. He did not stop. He did not greet him. He reached his office door. Opened it slightly. Then he paused. Davis. Mark turned. Eric's voice was calm and even. Welcome back. Mark swallowed. Thank you, sir. Eric nodded once, then closed the door behind him. Only then did Mark breathe. He knew this was not forgiveness. It was a beginning, something he had to work for. Day after day, change did not happen in one moment. It happened in every choice after. But the story was far from finished, because Eric Miles was not done with him yet. Mark returned home after his first day back, but the relief he felt inside the precinct didn't follow him through the front door. His apartment felt the same quiet hall, the same dull light from the lamp near the couch. Nothing had moved or changed, yet everything inside him felt rearranged. He placed his keys on the table and sat down heavily, trying to let the day sink in. He had survived the hearing. He had completed the training. He had walked into the precinct without falling apart. But none of that felt like closure. It felt like the start of something heavier, something he still had to face. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Davis. A short pause. Then a voice he recognized instantly. Riverside Point. 15 minutes. The call ended. Mark stared at the phone. His pulse kicked up hard. He knew the voice. He knew the tone. He knew the command hidden inside those few words. Chief Eric Miles wanted to see him. He grabbed his jacket and left. The sky was dark when he arrived at the lookout spot by the river. The water moved in slow waves, reflecting faint lights from passing cars on the bridge above. A couple jogged past. A dog barked in the distance. But the area near the railing was quiet. Eric was already there, hands in his pockets, standing still, watching the river like he could read it. Mark approached slowly. His steps felt heavy, as if the air around Eric had changed the space. "You called me," Mark said. Eric nodded without looking at him. "Do you know why I didn't file the report myself?" Mark stayed silent. He had wondered about it every day, every hour. He had replayed it endlessly. Eric turned his head slightly. "Because I wanted you to sit with it first." Mark swallowed. "I have." "No," Eric said. "Not yet." The words landed like a stone. Mark clenched his jaw. "Then why are we here?" Eric nodded toward a bench. "Sit." The tone left no room for refusal. Mark sat. Eric joined him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a moment neither spoke. Only the river filled the silence. Then Eric broke it. "You ever been pulled over, Davis?" Mark blinked. "What?" "A stop," Eric clarified. "Lights behind you. Questions. Requests for ID." "Once or twice," Mark said. He shrugged. "Nothing serious." Eric exhaled slowly. "I've lost count." Mark felt the air shift. "In every city I lived in," Eric continued, "I had cops pull me over. Ask why I was there, where I was going, who I was visiting, even when I was in my own neighborhood, even when I was wearing this badge." Mark looked down. He did not know what to say. Eric leaned back slightly. "You hit me because you were frustrated. But ask yourself why I frustrated you." Mark felt the truth creeping toward him, sharp and steady. Eric didn't give him time to avoid it. "Because I didn't act afraid of you." Mark's breath froze. "You expected fear," Eric said. "You expected me to rush for my wallet, to stammer, to bow my head, to show guilt I didn't have." Mark felt his throat tighten painfully. "And when I didn't," Eric said softly, "you got angry." The truth stung more than any punishment. Eric watched him. "You ever think about where that comes from? That instinct?" Mark looked out at the water. Wind moved across the surface in slow ripples. He wished he had an answer. Eric studied him for a long moment. You don't see it. Not yet. Mark shifted. I'm not. I don't think I'm that kind of person. Eric did not deny it. He did not call him racist. He simply asked, then what do you call it when you assume someone is dangerous just because they exist? Mark's chest tightened further. He felt cornered by truth, not accusation. Eric stood slowly. I didn't ask you here to tear you apart. I asked you here because you have a choice. Mark looked up. You can walk away from this and tell yourself it was just a mistake, Eric said. Or you can sit with it and figure out why it happened. Mark looked down, hands clasped between his knees. He hated that he didn't have an answer. He hated that he wanted one. When Internal Affairs calls you again, Eric said, they'll ask if you learned anything. He took a step back. Figure out what your answer is going to be. He turned and walked away, his footsteps quiet against the pavement. Mark watched him disappear into the dark. For the first time since the stop, he felt the weight of everything fully. The slap, the panic, the fear, the bias he did not know he carried. He stayed on that bench long after Eric left. The river kept moving. The night kept breathing. And for the first time, Mark let himself feel the truth without running. But feeling was only the beginning. The hardest part was still ahead. Mark stayed at the river much longer than he planned. He watched the water slide under the bridge while the truth pressed deeper into him. Not loud, not sharp, just steady and undeniable. By the time he stood up, he knew nothing in him would be the same again. The next days crawled by slowly. He tried to distract himself, tried to focus on routine, tried to shake the feeling that something new was unfolding inside him. But no matter what he did, Eric's words echoed. Figure out why it happened. Mark hated that he didn't know the answer. Hated that part of him didn't want to know. But he also knew running from it would only bury it deeper. 3 days later, Internal Affairs called. Another meeting. No explanation. Just a time. Mark drove there in silence. Different from before. Not afraid in the same way. Afraid in a deeper way. Afraid of facing the truth he could no longer deny. The precinct hummed with its usual noise when he walked in. Phones ringing. Footsteps crossing the hall. Officers exchanging reports. Everything looked normal, but Mark felt every glance land on him. He kept his head down and walked to the same conference room. The door was slightly open. Inside were the same 3 people. Captain Ross, Investigator Hale, and Chief Eric Miles. Eric did not look up as Mark entered. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room. Mark sat. He forced himself to breathe evenly. Hale opened a folder. Officer Davis, we have reviewed the final details of your case. This meeting is to complete the record of your suspension and evaluate your readiness to return to duty. Mark nodded. Hale continued. It says here you attended all required training sessions, completed the coursework, participated in evaluations. According to the instructor, Detective Carter, you showed genuine engagement. Mark did not move. Hale closed the folder. Before we finalize your return, we want you to walk us through your understanding of the incident. Briefly explain what you have learned. Every word Eric had spoken at the river pressed forward. This was the moment. Mark did not look away. I didn't hit the chief because he resisted, Mark began. I didn't hit him because he was uncooperative. He followed every instruction. He stayed calm. And I treated that calm like a threat. Ross and Hale exchanged a look, but they stayed silent. I thought I had control, Mark continued. I thought I was seeing danger. But what I saw was bias I didn't even know I had. When he didn't look scared of me, I reacted. Not because of anything he did. Because of something wrong in me. Hale leaned back slowly. Ross nodded almost imperceptibly. Eric lifted his eyes for the first time. Mark kept going. When he kept his tone calm, I felt challenged. Not by him. By what I assumed he was. And I realize now that assumption didn't come from the moment. It came from everything that shaped me before that moment. I didn't see a driver. I saw something else. Something I was trained to fear without knowing why. Mark paused. He let the words settle. I learned that the danger wasn't him. The danger was the belief that my fear made reality. I learned that if I don't face that, I'll hurt someone again. For a moment, no one spoke. Hale closed the file. "Thank you, Officer Davis." Ross folded his arms and gave one single nod. A nod that held approval and warning at once. Eric looked at him steadily. Not gently. Not harshly. Just truthfully. Hale stood. "We'll finalize your paperwork. You're reinstated." Mark exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not victory. Just release. He stood to leave, but Eric's voice stopped him again. "Davis." Mark turned. Eric did not raise his voice. He did not soften it either. "This is not the end. It is the start." Mark nodded. "I know." Eric held his gaze. For the first time, there was something new in his eyes. Not trust. Not friendship. But a door. Not open yet. But no longer closed. Mark stepped out of the room. Closed the door behind him. Walked down the hall with a quiet understanding that this second chance was not a gift. It was a responsibility. A long one. Days passed. Then weeks. Mark returned to street duty. Returned to calls. Returned to conversations he once dismissed. He noticed things he had never noticed before. He paid attention to tone. To posture. To fear in other people's voices. Things he once saw as defiance, he now heard as survival. And slowly, quietly, he changed. One morning, as officers gathered near the break room, Mark felt someone walk up beside him. He turned. It was Eric. Coffee in hand. Expression neutral. Mark straightened. Eric took a sip. Then looked at him with a calm that was different from the night of the stop. "Good work on the Jefferson case," Eric said. Mark blinked. "Thank you, sir." Eric nodded. Then walked away. It was simple. But it meant something. A small sign. A shift. A beginning. Mark watched him go, understanding finally that growth wasn't loud. Change didn't announce itself. It built slowly, in quiet choices. He turned back to his work. Focused. Steady. Different. Not perfect. But aware. And in the end, that awareness was the real turning point. Not just for him. For every person he would meet from that day on. Because sometimes the biggest change comes not from punishment, but from truth. From facing what you didn't want to see. And from choosing to do better the next time the moment arrives.